meet the iPhone XR. You might have already seen a review or two online regarding this phone, but what I intend to do is compress this review into 5 major categories: styling, operating system, camera, battery life, and price. These are the things I value most in my phone. It's not this phone, but in the phone that I use on a daily basis. And depending on who you are, the iPhone XR may or may not be a great choice. This video is brought to you by ExpressVPN. In a nutshell, virtual private networks mask your IP and encrypt your data. A big reason I use it is because it allows me to retain my security on the go. So if, say, I connect to a sketchy public Wi-Fi hotspot, I can be sure my data is safe. ExpressVPN offers both Android and App Store applications, by the way, for mobile private networking. Just a single click can tunnel you anywhere in the world. If, for example, you want to tunnel through Switzerland, for whatever reason, you can click Switzerland, and there we go. I'm now in Switzerland. So as you can see, easy to set up, easy to use in today's day and age, and also vital in today's day and age. And that's why you can visit expressvpn/science or click the link below for 3 months free with a 1-year subscription. So starting first with styling, I think the iPhone XR is a decent looking phone. The glass back, offered in a variety of colors, is a nice touch. It reminds me of the old school iMac G3s from the late 90s. This one here is Lisa's phone, and she's a huge fan of yellow, which was honestly a compelling reason to forego the more expensive XS counterpart. And I wasn't interested in spending $1,000 on a phone, so there's that as well. I'm not the biggest fan of these bezels. They're definitely thicker than my Pixel 3s, but I suppose this is the price we had to pay for a nearly full screen display. Or is it? Would you believe me if I told you this phone's screen-to-body ratio was less than 80%? A lot of it has to do with these bezels, as well as the obvious notch. The XS's bezels, by the way, are slightly smaller, so there's a trade-off there, but again, you're paying more for the phone overall, so these bezels aren't too big a deal. The phone is a bit large in the hand at first. It's a large iPhone. I'm used to much smaller iPhones. The iPhone 7, the iPhone SE was a very small, compact phone. I like that size a lot more. If we had like a full screen-to-body iPhone SE, that would be a really cool phone. I'd probably end up buying that one even if it cost $1,000 because it's small and compact, and I like the portability of such a phone. But this one's pretty big, so it takes some getting used to, and it's not necessarily that the frame is large. Like most phones are about this size. It's the fact that the screen is so big with respect to the phone. So, you know, one-handed use, if I want to go way up here to the top right, I literally have to slide my entire hand up here to be able to drag down the control center, right? So one-handed use is definitely difficult to do. With this phone, you're almost going to always have to use that second hand to control things, especially on the top of the display. The notch, by the way, it takes a bit of getting used to if you're not already used to it. This one, though, is much shallower than the Pixel 3 XLs, which means it's much more tolerable in the long run. Even when streaming like a full screen video, it's not that bad. By the way, the stereo speaker setup is pretty solid. The earpiece is a bit trebly as usual, but it definitely beats using a single speaker. The primary microphone is down here, as well as a lightning port. A SIM card tray is on the bottom right, and the power volume buttons are on opposing sides. The ringer toggle is here as well, which I'm actually glad to see. I'm glad that it's still on iPhones. The back of the phone feels very premium. Like I said, glass back, aluminum trim, an undertone of yellow. In this case, definitely makes it stand out. My personal favorite is the red model, but yellow looks great as well. And of course, it's Lisa's favorite color, so she had to go with that. Now, apart from the camera setup, the only other marks on this side of the iPhone are the Apple logo and the word iPhone. As for the operating system, this is typical iOS with a bit of added flair on account of the missing home button. So the swipe feature is an interesting one to take on, but much like the sheer size of this thing, you get used to it. Apps close in a snap, the UI is straightforward, and the settings window is the same as it's always been, just with a few extras. The A12 Bionic chip in here is lightning fast, the first 7nm tech to actually officially hit the market, and it's Apple's own in-house design, so that's pretty incredible, and it definitely shows. I mean, the operating system is super snappy. Anything I do is just instant, and that's what I expect in an $800 phone. But again, with the missing home button, there are a few gestures you have to get used to. For instance, the control center accessed by swiping down from the top right. Apps are closed by just swiping up from the bottom. It's a different approach, but like I said a few times already, you get used to it, and I think Apple did a great job with sculpting the OS around the lack of a physical home button. I've honestly never had an issue with iOS in the past, save the lack of an accessible root file system. It's one of the reasons I often pivot between iOS and Android. While I love the simplicity and ease of use with iPhones, there's something intuitive and versatile about Android that always pulls me back, and when you're on something as pure and stock as a Pixel 3, you don't really miss iOS as much, but that's a different story for a different video. What I will say about the XR though is that if you're already familiar with iOS from previous devices, there's only a shallow learning curve with the added gestures. Up next is the camera, and this is a hot topic for these phones especially. One of the biggest drawbacks from the XS and the XS Max is the lack of a secondary telephoto lens, but its absence is only sometimes noticed. When taking a normal photo, for instance, you'll notice that the angle is fairly wide, which means you'll need to move a bit closer if you want macro detail like this here. The XR is limited in its portrait mode capabilities to humans, by the way, which means that you won't get that sweet bokeh background blur unless a face, a literal human face, is detected. Otherwise, you'll see this message right here, and that sucks. But everywhere else, the camera, it shines, the rear camera anyway. I did notice a degree of oversaturation in especially dim scenes, but this is easily correctable in post. Contrast is pretty decent, general low light performance is satisfactory thanks to a wide f1.8 aperture, and the quad tone flash is actually usable, not something I can say about its competitors. Video shoots at up to 4K 60 and it looks pretty sweet, as does optical image stabilization and 1080p, even at a slow-mo 240 FPS. Here are some video clips for comparison. Alright, and I'm testing the front-facing video along with its audio. The secondary mic is actually in the back of the camera, so I'm interested to see if this sounds any different than filming on the rear, so we'll see. Alright, and now I'm filming with the rear camera, 4K 60, and really interested to see how this sounds, just because iPhones tend to sound pretty good on video. Stereo mics, so it should sound pretty clear through and through. My Pixel 3's microphone is terrible. That audio sounds very bad, so anything's a step up from that, and iPhones traditionally have had pretty good microphones, so hoping that this recording sounds somewhat decent. Quality definitely drops at 240 FPS, but that in and of itself is a pretty incredible feat for such a small and compact sensor. Stereo recording also keeps audio in check, so I wouldn't be too disappointed with just like the built-in microphones if I was on the go trying to get some quick shots. The front-facing camera is a 7 megapixel f2.2 sensor, good for selfies and the like, but it's noticeably not as good as the Pixel 3s or the Pixel 3 XLs. Now, those cameras do have two cameras up front to kind of give it an edge, but I think Google's processing, right, its onboard processing is significantly better than Apple's, especially when you want to blur things out of the background when using portrait mode. I think it just overcompensates, and it really just blurs the edges too much to where you don't see defined differences between the foreground and the background. Even the rear camera on the XR does this, and it's disappointing. Now, Google has its own issues with its portrait mode, if you will. It's very aggressive, and that means that you'll find very sharp, distinct edges between the foreground and background, but that could also mean that the background kind of shows up in the foreground, meaning it's not properly blurred. So I think both phones take different approaches here. I just don't like the fact that the iPhone overcompensates and blurs too much in the foreground, because that's what you don't want blurred, right? You want the foreground isolated and fully, sharp. So when it is blurred, it's disappointing. It means that you kind of have to revert back to the stock image, which at that point is no longer a portrait photo. By the way, the camera app is fairly simplified, but I don't necessarily see this as a bad thing. If Apple intends to target customers content with ease of use, they did an excellent job here. You can swap between camera modes near the shutter button, and the opposite end sports controls for flash, timers, tones, and what I'm calling a digital aperture, a function that essentially controls the degree of background blur in portrait mode. All in all, I'd give this camera a solid 8 out of 10 in 2019. My limited experience with the XS is part of the reason why I'm not willing to go any higher with this score. The other reason is the fact that My daily is a Pixel 3, which I'd still only give a 9 out of 10 on the camera side. It's just too good to ignore. It does have its issues, but it's still a better single sensor rear camera than the iPhone XRs. Up next is battery life, and this is where the XR truly shines. Now there are trade-offs, again, we'll address those, but it is a really good phone with respect to battery life. Compared to my Pixel 3 especially, it is miles better. With moderate use, this is easily a 2-day charge, while my Pixel 3 barely manages one. A lot of this has to do with the low screen resolution. A fair bit of resentment toward this phone initially had to do with its subpar pixel density at just 326 ppi. Basically old school Retina, which is a step back for the iPhone, but up close, I mean, does it really matter? You can see individual pixels, sure, but I personally think it's been blown way out of proportion, used as a vice by those who are already predisposed to hate Apple products. And that's fine, look, you're entitled to hate any product for any reason. I just think that the screen resolution is a cheap jab because it still looks great in person, especially for an IPS display. Contrast is pretty incredible, colors are vibrant and accurate, the screen itself gets very bright, and you don't have to worry about things like burn-in, which plagued earlier Google Pixel models. Kind of a cheap shot back to Google, but still worth mentioning. But back to battery life, continuous use will result in anywhere between like 9 and 12 hours of life. That's pretty good. That's comparable to giants like the Note 9 and the XS Max, and it's thanks primarily to the screen resolution, which is why I brought it up. You can watch an entire season of your favorite TV show on Netflix, albeit not in full 1080p, but still, and probably still have battery life left over. That's how great this thing is, and it'll make the transition to something smaller that much more difficult. It's, again, the one thing I hate about the Pixel 3. But again, this comes at a cost of not having a 1080p screen. But I'd be more than happy to pay this price, even for a phone with a 6.1-inch display. The PPI is not that bad, really. And this brings us to our last category, price. Unlocked, you'll pay anywhere between $750 for this thing and $899. No slouch for an entry-level iPhone. I know this isn't what Apple calls it, but it is what it comes across as when you think about the things that are cut back in this model, especially compared to the $1,000 and the $1,300 versions. The second rear camera is gone on the XR. The screen resolution is cut down by 25%. Super AMOLED is swapped for an arguably inferior IPS display. Bezels are thicker. HDR is absent. Heck, even the waterproof rating is slightly lower for the XR. But this is the price we pay, or rather the price we save for a more affordable Apple smartphone. If you want the XS, you'll need to pay at least $250 more for a model with equivalent storage. That's insane, but it's the trend all across the board, not just with Apple. I mean, the Pixel 3 costs $800, and that's why I'm a bit confused as to how to conclude this video. I don't really know. I mean, I know the Pixel 3 is a close competitor to the XRs, right? Especially with respect to price, so I don't really know where to go from here. How about answering the fundamental question? Do I recommend it? Actually, yeah, more so than the XS and XS Max, simply from a price perspective. Paying over $1,300 for a fully loaded smartphone is absolutely ludicrous in my opinion, but that's my opinion. And look, even the basic iPhone XS will set you back $1,000. So these are my parting words. If you must buy an iPhone, make it the iPhone XR, and choose the color that fits you best and feel good about it at the end of the day. Despite its drawbacks and compromises, I still find it to be an impressive and highly usable phone. I'm still not giving up my Pixel 3 though. So what do you guys think? Which would you choose? Let me know what you're sporting currently down below and why. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I appreciate it. Click that red subscribe button for extra support and consider becoming a member if we mean that much to you. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. This is Science Studio. Thanks for learning with us.